Hello, Jonathan Lampel here, and this is my instructor notes video that goes along with the Modeling a Husky Puppy exercise, which is the final challenge in the Mesh Modeling Bootcamp course. So for anyone not watching this on cgcookie.com and you're wondering what that is, there's a link in the description below, and it's the most concise and comprehensive 3D modeling course that you can find anywhere online. So this exercise is simply to model this husky dog as seen in the concept art, to make the final model be all quads, to surround all major anatomical features with loops, and to keep the poly count below 7,000 triangles. In this video, I'll be going over some of the submissions and pointing out a few key areas that tripped up a lot of people, and show you how to go about fixing those things. It would kind of defeat the purpose of the exercise if I showed step by step how to model this guy, so I won't do that here. But if you've completed all the previous projects in the course, you have all the tools and techniques necessary to complete this project already, and I have no doubt that you'll be able to get started and take what I say here into account. Before we get started, I do want to say that I chose models that I thought had quirks which represented common pitfalls that were in most everybody's submissions. So while I am going to be focusing on some of the negative aspects of these models, it's only with the intention of helping everyone improve. That's just the nature of a critique. And I've asked each person before using their work, and they're all cool with it. And for some of them, this is their first time making anything anywhere near this complexity. So to go from making a fairly basic model to a full dog character really is a massive jump that should not be understated. So if you finished this exercise, just give yourself a huge pat on the back and don't be discouraged by my nitpicking. I'll start out by showing my result first, not because it's perfect. In fact, I'll go over some ways I think it could be improved at the end, but because it'll be our example of a few things that I'm talking about. In particular, I want you to notice that it's all quads. All the quads are relatively evenly spaced and evenly sized, of course giving preference to areas that need more detail like the face and the feet. And most importantly, I'm using my loops to define all of the major anatomical features. So we'll talk more about that in a minute, but as a result, when I subdivide this, notice how it just becomes a smoother version of itself. The details don't really change, and there aren't any extra complications that come into play. Everything just works as it should, and it's nice and clean. So I'll come back to this a few times as a reference, but for now, let's look at the first model by Draken. The two main areas that artists tend to struggle with when they start out with 3D modeling is proportions and topology. Now, out of the two, I would argue that proportions are the more important one because proportions are going to define what your topology needs to be in the first place. And if the proportions are off, then even the best topology is not going to save your model. So I would really commend you here, first of all, because you have good proportions. Overall, there's a few things that we could tweak, but I'm going to be looking at proportions more in other models, so I won't spend the time here. But you've really gone ahead and tried to nail that down first, which I think is perfect. So what I'm focusing on here is more about the topology, but I want to say that with the preface of proportions are more important to get right first, and then move on to the topology itself. So a few things that stand out to me here. First of all, you have the appropriate loops here in the face, which is awesome. You have the loop that goes around the eyes, loop that goes around the eyes there. You have the raccoon mask. Actually, I have a cheat sheet for this that I made for the Mesh Modeling Bootcamp, but I made it a little while after, so I don't know if you've seen it already. But I put together the 5 essential face loops, and this is fairly universal no matter what kind of face you have. Maybe not a bug's face, but most faces are going to have these defining features. So first of all, you have the loop that goes around the eyes, just to make the eyes. But second, you have the loop that is sort of the raccoon mask that goes around the eyes, around the forehead, and around the bridge of the nose. And what this does is it helps contain all of the details in that area and helps everything to flow together in the right direction. Because if you don't have that, then things go haywire, which we'll see a little bit later. But in this case, you have that, which is awesome. You have loops going down from the bridge of the nose down to the chin, which is cool. But the other one, the loop that goes around the mouth, is a bit missing. So it looks like you started to do that here, where you have a loop that goes back and then takes a turn and goes up and around the head. But really we want that to come around and go towards the front of the mouth. We want it to surround that entire detail. And the reason for that is when we go and animate this type of mesh, if we don't have that supporting edge loop, it's going to be very stretched whenever you start to move these things around. So I know you didn't plan on animating this just based on the fact that the mouth is very small, and the mouth really should, instead of going down and around that direction, it really should be quite a bit longer and stretch all the way up. And it looks like you started out planning for that with the loop that goes all the way around here, but just continuing this inset all the way up, making that nice smile, and having a loop that goes all the way around is definitely going to help you in the long run. And that's going to help your detail quite a bit, especially when subdivided. So next, beyond that loop that's missing, next you have the nose, which the nose is pretty cool. I don't think I've seen a nose made like you've made it here. So I think that's pretty awesome. Like, you definitely gave it a unique approach, and I think it looks pretty cool. It's a very cartoony nose. One thing that I would note is that it kind of looks like a very uncomfortable flap of skin the more I look at this. So one thing that you could do is make this area a little bit more narrow, maybe widen this area a bit so that it looks a bit more even, it doesn't look like a gash, and then bring this part forward a little bit so it just doesn't look quite as deep. And I'm kind of messing with the geometry there, but I think that will help a little bit just to make it not look like it's an uncomfortable cut into his face. It looks more like a natural nose. So I think that works out. Looks like you have a stray vertex up there. But overall, just spend some time tweaking some of these quads, just evening things out. Overall, you really have the right idea here, so keep going. If you feel like starting over again, definitely give it a shot. I like how you contained the loop right in here. That's awesome. What else? Oh, next I was going to talk about the neck, and you have loops going kind of around the neck, but not quite. So you have a loop that's going here and then taking a turn going that direction, and you have a loop that's going here and continuing up towards the mouth. But you really want to have one continuous loop that goes all the way around from the front of the throat to the back of the neck. And the reason for this is anytime that you have a joint that's going to be twisted, you need a loop that runs perpendicular or straight through it. So we have his skull here, and we know that he has his spine, and sometimes this is going to twist in this direction. So we want to have a loop that runs perpendicular right through that axis of rotation. So you almost have that here, but not quite. So what we can do to fix this really quick, I'll just erase these. This might be cramping up some of these edge loops here, so maybe it's not entirely ideal, but just to demonstrate, you can move these around, even out the quads, and then add in one more loop that goes all the way around. So I'll bring up my knife tool with K, hit Z to do cut through, so I'm cutting all the way through the mesh, and just make a cut right like that, and then take this vertex, and that one, hit Alt-M, merge at center. So now we have a pole, but we can even this out a little bit, like so. And we could spend quite a bit of time tweaking this, but at least now we have a loop that runs all the way across. So when he swings his neck around, it's not going to be pulling his shoulder in weird directions, and it's not going to be messing with the top of his head or the side of his head. So anywhere you have a joint, make sure that you have loops running perpendicular to the axis of rotation, which just kind of happens naturally. Like you have that here, you have that on his back legs, and you have the loops that go around the hips like so, which is perfect. That's awesome. That's exactly what we're looking for. So let's see, another note is right here on the front of the chest. I've seen on a few models that there are these loops that don't really do much. They add detail, but not for any particular reason. In this case, there's no circular detail on the front of a dog's chest, but there is a circular loop here, and so you're defining a detail that's not quite there. And the reason that's a problem is if we subdivide this, because we're talking about subdivision surface modeling, then you're going to see, we're going to have some artifacts there. He looks like he's got, I don't know, oddly placed dog nipples, and so we don't want that. What we're going to do instead is just simplify that area. So really, we can just take these vertices, slide them over, like so. So you cannot slide all the way there. There we go. W and remove doubles, slide these back, and now these are all quads. It's much more simplified, and if we were to look at this again while it's subdivided, now we're not getting any of those incorrect details. It's just one smooth surface flowing into the next. So keep things as simple as possible wherever you can. And I do like that you've used some of these areas to redirect your topology. One area where that's pretty cool is here in the back, where I can tell what you've done is you didn't want to have your loops run all the way down here and get really pinched towards the butt, and that's good. So you redirected the loops all the way around, and that's definitely the right idea. The one critique or suggestion that I would have here is, instead of looping this all the way around in on itself, what that's going to do is cause a bulge right in here, just because you're having two poles so close to each other. What you can do on mirrored models especially is instead loop them in towards the center of the mirror. And so you could have these two loops loop in like that, and that would allow for much more natural flow of edges. And that's what I did on my model to solve that problem. You can see that example here, where I've looped this in towards the middle instead of allowing them to continue all the way back. So I hope that helps, that suggestion. But overall, I think you're off to a really good start, and redefining some of that area as well will help some of these pinched quads, where this vertex was kind of floating up in the middle of nowhere, so you might want to pull that down as well. And it's just, after that, it's just looking at all of these different angles and endlessly tweaking. We can see that maybe this is a little bit too flat. We can pull that out. If we look at this from the side, it kind of makes an odd shape, so maybe we want to round this out a bit. And using the subdivision surface modifier is a great way to kind of spot some of these quirks, where once you have this, and especially if you use a matte cap shader, one trick is to use one that's kind of shiny, and then you can see all of the different deformations or the different angles of reflection, and you can see where that works well and where it works not quite so well. So you can see right up here that there's something going on right over there. And if we tab into edit mode, we can see indeed that's where we have those poles that are really close to each other, like I mentioned that we had back there and here on the front. So we could also try to find a way to solve this by redirecting some of these. Maybe we'd have to add in another edge loop towards the top. That kind of gave us some triangles, so it's not a perfect solution by any means. But regardless, you can see that by changing that topology, we've now removed that artifact. And we can look around at all of the different reflections here. We can see where it might need some improvement. But overall, good work here. I think the last note that I had was just on the feet, that even though I said the feet were optional, by the way, so for anyone who hasn't taken the exercise, modeling the paws was totally optional, so props for giving it a go in the first place, because that was totally just for fun. Good on you for even giving it a shot. But just rounding them out a little bit, even if that's not totally accurate, that's fine. Just so that it's not quite so blocky, would definitely help. So with that, I think that covers all the things I want to talk about for this model. So let's move on to the next. This next submission is by Sirgoth, and one thing that I recommended doing in the course itself and also in the exercise is, once you finish your initial modeling, I recommended turning off the background images so that you don't accidentally Xerox things and make things too flat. You'll see in another exercise that we'll look at in a second where that kind of became a problem of only looking at this from front and side view and kind of neglecting the rest of the perspectives. And I don't think that you did that. I think that you followed my advice there, because the back here is nice and flat, and the stomach and some of these other areas, you're not getting that same sharp, flat, blocky problem that a lot of the other ones had. So if that's the case, good for you for going that way. It's definitely harder and makes it more difficult to eyeball the proportions. So if you did that, then that just makes it even more impressive that you came up with this result. Now, where I think this kind of trips you up is it's a little bit too far off some of these areas. And I can't tell whether you built this and then subdivided it and that's where some of the smoothness is coming from, but a lot of these features kind of melt into each other. And so if we take our proportional editing, and I'm just going to spend a little bit of time tweaking this and pulling it back out towards some of these areas, I think that's going to help us quite a bit, at least get the desired shape. Because at the moment, it's definitely a dog, but it's missing kind of some of those key sharp features that really give it some character. So it doesn't have to match up exactly, but just pulling out some of these volumes to at least be the same size will definitely help. And especially from front view as well, this looks quite a bit chunky. So if we take this and pull this in a bit, that should help quite a bit. But one thing that I did see on a lot of exercises is the legs attach down here. Now, if we look at a dog's skeleton, I've got an image right up here, you can see that actually the shoulder is pretty far up the body, and where the original bone is going to rotate is kind of up here. It's not quite so far down. So it looks like in the concept art, I can understand how that can be definitely deceiving in the fact that it looks like, okay, the leg attaches to the body right over there. But in fact, that's just kind of where the fur meets and squishes together, and it looks like it's all coming together. Whereas the actual joint is, farther up, maybe up here. And so that's something that we need to take into account when we're modeling. So in actuality, we need to take up some of these areas like this, and we just need to pull them right up. Kind of pull them up and out, and give them a little bit more of a shoulder. Like so. And then take in some of these areas here, or actually I'll just take in this edge loop, like so. And I'm going to bring that way up. If we go into wireframe view, it looks like it's coming up all the way in and then kind of rotates out that way. And you can see that it makes a huge difference. It kind of screwed up some of this modeling here, so it looks a little bit funny. Maybe I can really quickly go into sculpt mode and smooth that out. We're not going to get a perfect result there. But bringing up those legs is going to make a huge difference in the proportions of the dog. That way, when it's separated a little bit from the stomach, and there's a little bit of a gap between where the legs meets the body, that way when he's running, when he moves his legs, it's not going to pull his stomach along with it. So you can take these vertices here and just pull them up in towards the body a little bit. And that's a little bit difficult because this area, might look a little bit pinched, so it's kind of have to balance that out. But overall, bring those legs up a bit, and that should definitely help. You have the loop that goes all the way around, and we talked about the loop in the last model that he had. So you have a loop that goes all the way around here, which is perfectly awesome. But one thing that you might want to have is a loop that goes around in this direction and kind of goes around the legs here and just goes around that area of rotation, because it's going to rotate, right about here, maybe a little bit higher, but it's going to need to rotate there. And so you're going to need multiple loops in order for this not to stretch quite so badly. So once you have that, then you can add in another edge loop down here and kind of pull this out a little bit more. Let me turn on proportional editing again. We can match that up a little bit better. But yeah, that should help quite a bit. And just like we want the loops going around that way in the front legs, we want that in the back legs as well. So here we have a pole, and it's also a very stretched quad right next to it, and that's definitely going to cause some problems as soon as he moves his legs. So what we want to have is a loop that goes from here, actually all the way around this way, and can either meet there and go down his leg or go all the way around. But either way, we definitely want a loop going in this direction, which is going to help that animation quite a bit and define that back leg. You can kind of see that a little bit here in the skeleton as well, exactly where that's going to happen. But yeah, redefining that area is definitely going to help, and it'll probably also help you get rid of this really stretched quad that's right up here. It'd help fix that a bit. So that way you can have your loops going in this direction, like so, and then some going down the tail, some going around the back, and that should help quite a bit. Lastly, I want to look at the loops along the face. So this is an area where, really placing the loops along the major anatomical features is going to be a huge help, because right now everything's kind of blending into each other. You have the face that's very, very soft and doesn't have a defined chin, whereas in the concept art, he has a very defined jawline, very cartoony in that section, and it comes to a point there which is kind of like a tuft of fur. But either way, this is much too soft, where it just melts into the neck. And so what you're going to want to do is, one of the first things that you put in your model is that loop that goes, from the chin right to the jaw. And maybe we can go into wireframe view so we can see exactly where we want that. But you want to loop from the jaw. Maybe it can come up that way, go back, and then up towards the head. So wherever you have that, as long as it's somewhere around that area, and you can see that directly kind of contradicts the flow that you have right in here. And so having that is going to help you maintain that structure a bit better and help keep things looking a little bit more natural. And so that way you can kind of pull these areas out a little bit more, like that. That's kind of looks a little bit weird, but that's going to be pulled out more. And also the front of the face. So this is definitely, okay, so this area is one where I can kind of tell that you went from front view to side view and kind of just matched it up, because you're getting this very triangular shaped face, where really the front of a dog's face should be more a little bit flat and then kind of be a little bit more round. I think, do I have a picture here? I think I have a picture. Okay, this isn't quite from top view, but you can see that, it starts out like that. It is a bit more sharp than a lot of animals, but it's not quite that sharp. So what I'm going to do here is just use my proportional editing like we have been using. Pull that back, but at the same time pull some of these other areas forward a bit. And just round that out a little bit. Like so. And I would definitely recommend using separate spheres as the eyes. That way, as you're manipulating these, they don't get all mushy and odd. It just helps them be better defined. If you do that, I think that would be a huge help. Bring some of these areas out and down. And if you really define that area, it should do quite a bit. And also the mouth here, you can see in the concept art that it's fairly straight in the way that kind of gives that smile. For here, we don't see that very much at all, so it ends up looking a little bit like a camel almost. So if you bring this up a bit, and if we go into wireframe view and kind of match this up a bit more, kind of bring down these areas. Like so. It's kind of a quick, hacky version of what I'm looking for, but something like that would definitely help with the dog-like expression. But beyond that, mostly just wanted to talk about proportions and just making sure we have the loops going around the areas of the major features. And if we take a look at a comparison of this versus the original, just those simple changes really do make quite a big difference in making this look like a friendly dog. This next model is by Stefan, and there's a lot of things done right in this model. But what kind of distracts from some of that is the face a little bit, and that's what jumps out to me initially. So for this critique, I'm going to be talking about the face in particular, and both in terms of topology and proportions. So we're looking for the major loops. You have the loop around the eye, you have the raccoon mask loop there. You don't have the loop around the mouth, but it looks like you came pretty close, so I would recommend putting that in first before filling in some of these other gaps. So go ahead and put in a loop through there, and you have your loop going up through the jaw and up towards the head. So that is awesome, just like that. But the one thing that I do notice is that it's just not quite the right shape, is the thing that jumps out to me at first, just in terms of proportions and how everything's angled. And what I think happened is, when I look at this in front view, it looks pretty close to the concept art. And when I look at this from side view, it looks pretty close to the concept art. But when you rotate around it, things get a little bit wonky in regular perspective view. And so this is what I meant when I said that, once you get your basic shapes down, your basic loops that, really define everything else. So your face loops here, you have your loops that go around the legs. We already talked about how maybe these should be a little bit higher, but I don't need to go over that for every model. But yeah, you have those major loops, but once you have those in place, then you can go ahead and just kind of turn off your background images and just look at this from perspective view using only a reference here over on the side. And that's going to help prevent some of these really sharp transitions like you have here from top view. So you have like the bridge of the muzzle here is really, really thin, and the whole angle of the face is quite sharp. So if we just use our proportional editing here a bit, we can bring some of these guys forward, like so. It's probably going to mess with our eye a little bit, and I'll talk about the topology in a little bit, because it's a little bit messy, but overall, like, you definitely have the right idea here. But just pulling out some of these corners and then pulling them instead of straight out or straight sideways, pulling them out diagonally is going to help round out this head a little bit and get rid of that shape that's just a little bit too sharp. And we can spread out these areas here. Like so, and that's going to really help keep these from being too sharp. I can turn on connected proportional editing instead, so I can do the bottom and top parts of the mouth separately, give them a bit more volume, pull them out like that. Okay, so that's definitely going to help. But even more than that, there's a few things about topology that I want to point out here. So technically this is all quads, but in a lot of these areas, there are quads that act a little bit funky. So one example here is, this is actually considered a pole, believe it or not. So it's a vertex with only two edges connected to it. This acts very interestingly, because no matter which way we pull this, we're going to break one of these quads. So if I turn off proportional editing and pull this one way, you can see that it's going to have negative effect on this quad. You can see that it's overlapping itself and kind of broken. If I move it this way, then we're going to have real troubles with this quad. And so it's just best to avoid any vertex connected by only two. It's going to cause some weird geometry, which you can see is happening here, especially if we go ahead and subdivide this, which, was it subdivided already? Maybe it was. Yeah, you can see that it's causing a real pinching right up there. But if we just kind of get rid of all of that, remove doubles, move that back over, you can see that that pinching is now gone. So we want to try to avoid those wherever possible. And we also want to avoid quads that are basically triangles. Like this one here is definitely a quad, but if you pull this out a little bit more, now it's more quad shaped. So technically it's still a quad when it's up here. The problem with that is that the edge loops are taking very sharp turns, and when they're taking sharp turns, it's going to cause pinching. It's one of the things that causes that. So just trying to evenly space these things out, try to keep it clean and even. will definitely go a long way. So there's a few areas in this model where, that would be helpful. And it's not easy. That's one of those things that just takes a lot of practice. We can get rid of some of these center lines that are just super close. And I also try to avoid any of these quads. Like if you applied this mirror modifier, this would technically now become a quad, but I try to avoid them wherever possible. But overall, it's not a huge deal. That's not the hill I would die on for this model. Yeah, one thing that you can do here, if you ever are not sure how to connect things like this, just take a whole area, hit F to fill, make that an n-gon, and then you can try to reconnect some of these areas in a different way, which may or may not be a bit more pleasing. That way you can space these out a little bit more. Now it's a bit more even. And yeah, so take some time. I'll probably start the face portion of it over again just to get more practice in the face modeling. Not that it's beyond repair by any means, but just the fact that the more times you do it from scratch, the faster and easier it'll become, and it'll just be second nature after a while. It just comes with practice. It's just one of those things. But mostly I just wanted to point out that the direction that your edge loops are going are definitely going to direct the shape of the model. And so we definitely want to pay more attention to that and space out some of these quads to be a bit more evenly spaced, evenly distributed, not too sharp, not too pinched, something like that. One thing that is cool that you did is you give him sort of eyebrows, and I noticed that Husky dogs have eyebrows, and that's one thing I'll mention on my model that I totally left out, is you can see that this has some pretty defined mad eyebrows up there, which are pretty cool. And you definitely added that in, though instead of pulling these farther back to make the eyebrows, I would probably just pull this whole part forward more. And that way we can round out the head a bit, and it won't be quite so pinched, and it'll look a little bit better. So yeah, at this point it's just pushing and pulling vertices. But yeah, I'd give this one another shot and just see how you can improve your edge flow, especially up here. This is an example of kind of a broken quad, and I don't know, I've said that a few times, but I'm not sure if I've explained that in this video yet. So a broken quad is a problem because it's essentially, all quads are two triangles, and that's fine. But what happens when it's really stretched like this is it gets split by Blender, and it says, okay, it's just going to be right in there. But the problem of having it undefined is if this ever moves or animates or whatever, how it's split can be changed. So you don't actually know, it's very unpredictable whether it's going to be split like that, or maybe it'll be split like that. And the results are completely different. Like, you obviously don't want that to happen, but there's not really any way to stop that from happening. So you want to make sure that your quads are not quite so stretched like that, and that way you won't accidentally get those weird deformations no matter what happens. So hopefully that helps. And another thing that you can use if you're getting a bit of uneven topology here, not a big deal, just select the entire area, hit W and smooth a couple times, and that'll smooth that out. So you can even do that with this area here, where you have the whole muzzle that looks a little bit messy. It's really not a problem at all. Just select it, hit smooth, and work your way towards cleanliness that way. It's impossible to get a completely smooth model just by pushing and pulling vertices. Like, that'll never happen. So just use the smooth operator, and that will definitely help keep things clean. There's a few other places that have those stretched and uneven quads, and I would encourage you to look at the rest of the model and try to keep your topology fairly even, so that there's no areas where they're really sharp or really dense, and have other areas where they're very spaced out, and just kind of try to keep it all roughly even, giving preference to the areas that need a bit more detail. So Of course, the face in general will have more detail, but as you can see, like on the back, this area is much more dense than that area. So not a huge deal, not a deal breaker by any means, but it's good to keep in mind. So if we look at this from the front, I think we're pretty set. There's not a whole lot else we need to do. Let's bring our proportional editing up a bit. We can tweak this for a while. But the main thing I wanted to talk about was just modeling the face. And you can see that just those quick changes here make a really big difference. So good work, keep it up, and let's look at the next model. This model is another solid submission by Liviu Marian. It does meet the requirements for the most part, but it is missing some of the loops that go around the major anatomical features. So we have a loop going around top of the legs there. We have the loop going around the eyes. We have the raccoon mask. We have a loop going around the mouth. However, there's a lot of things that don't quite match the anatomy. And so first, I want to talk about proportions. Well, we've already discussed proportions, but I want to go over that here just because it's so important. And it's probably one of the most important aspects of modeling is just keeping the proportions and making sure that, you know, the overall shape and where you're placing those loops is matching the anatomy. So like with a lot of these other models, I'm going to bring up some of these legs, shoulders. I don't know what to call them on a dog. I guess they're shoulders. But yeah, I'm going to bring these up a bit just to be surrounding the area where they would actually be rotating instead of sticking out from the bottom of the body. And bring these in, and then bring these guys out, like so. And yeah, we definitely don't want these to connect right into the stomach. So we want to bring those up a little bit, and then, you know, have a loop. I guess we can't really do that here. But ideally we'd have a loop. I guess, yeah, let's put in another loop like that. And that way we can take these. I'll turn off my proportional editing. We can take these back down, like so. But yeah, we just want to, you know, bring up that area where that's going to be deforming a bit. I'll turn my proportional editing back on. You know, overall, the quads here are a little bit stretched. They're a bit too elongated, where they don't have to be perfectly square, of course, but it just means that you have quite a few more loops going, you have quite a few more loops going in this direction than you do in that direction. And so not a horrible thing, but just something to be aware of, because that way, you know, what it's going to cause is you're going to have a lot more sharpness in this direction when you subdivide things than in that direction. So it's just going to look a bit uneven. And actually we can go ahead and subdivide this. You can see we have a couple problems here towards the middle. We can just delete this excess geometry here. And things like that. Looks like there's a couple places where we have that. That's not a big deal. Let's just delete those. But yeah, you can see that this area here is we're getting a lot of detail along these lines and a far less amount of detail along those lines. So you want to keep it about even. But another thing is that, you know, these loops are kind of running, instead of following the anatomy, they're kind of going back and everything's kind of flowing in this direction, which overall is okay, unless he's going to be doing a lot of twisting. That's really the main concern, is if he's turning around or twisting, any of these areas are going to have a little bit of trouble deforming just because they're not lining up with each other along those axes of rotation. So if you were to, say, move the first, or the back portion of his body, let's say he kind of, you know, bends. It's kind of a weird way to do it. Let's rotate around the 3D cursor. Yeah, he's going to have a hard time making this movement because the loops aren't supporting, you know, the correct deformation. So we want to make sure that those are going perpendicular to whatever he's rotating around, and that will certainly help. So try to keep the loops going straight up around the body if possible, and try to, well, you do have the loop going around the leg there, but maybe define that shoulder a little bit more. And your back leg is pretty good. Now, we already talked about proportions very much in the last model. You have a very similar thing going on where it's very sharp. Again, I think that's because of starting out from front view and looking at it there, switching back and forth between these two views. Spend a little bit more time in perspective view and especially top view, and that will really help you out. Looking at some of these areas here, we switch back to median point. But yeah, matching this up a little bit more will also help. And instead of getting this really sharp transition here where it kind of goes whoop like that, we want it to be a little bit more flat. So we want it to go more so like that. So if we take our topology here from the front and just kind of pull it outwards, pull this inwards a little bit, we can better support that shape. All right, so we could mess with the proportions a bit more, and that's definitely something I would recommend paying close attention to if you were to give this another go. But one thing that I wanted to point out in particular here, which is a problem on quite a few models and even some of my own models for sure, is what I would call the problem of meandering loops. So really what happens is once you have your basic loops down, sometimes when you fill in other loops, they kind of just snake around everywhere. So you have a loop that goes up through here, kind of takes a corner up there, goes around down there. You have a pretty clean loop that goes around through there. That's cool. There's a loop that comes up here, kind of meanders around the face, takes a couple corners, and they just kind of wander around and don't really define any particular anatomy. They just kind of fill in however they happened to, I don't know, find a gap and go with the flow. So this loop right here is pretty good. It kind of defines the neck and the jaw, so that's a good one. This is a good one, but some of the other ones just kind of snake around and take corners where there don't really need to be any particular corners. And so that's a problem when it comes to subdivision surfaces, and it's going to cause some pinching. And mostly you're just defining areas, like you can see right up here, like this is a really clearly defined area where that's not really a feature of a dog, that's not part of the anatomy. And when we look, yep, that's exactly where those poles are at. And so try to keep your loops extremely clean and not define any features that are not there. So maybe just have one loop there and everything else is just, straight back and forth. Might have, one over here, one over here, one over there, but try not to use them just for the sake of filling in the gaps however possible. Really only use them where you need to define a feature and where one feature separates from another. That's really the major use of poles, and for everybody else watching, I've covered that in the course quite a bit. But poles are used to separate features from other features, and so there's not really anything to separate up here, and so it's separating a whole bunch of things where it's just not needed. And so try to avoid using so many poles in those areas, and I think one thing that'll help is just using less geometry. I don't think all of this is quite necessary up in here. It's a little bit dense, and you can get the exact same shape with far less vertices. So I would definitely recommend, giving it another go. I think you're really on the right track here, but just try to keep your loops straight until they need to turn around particular features, and reserve your poles for, only moving around those features and, not just an area which needs to be smooth or flat. Lastly, I do want to fix the ears a little bit, just because they reminded me a little bit of a mouse, which was kind of cute, but not quite dog ears. So I'm gonna pull those down, and I guess my proportional editing is gonna give him a tumor. Alright, but hopefully that helps. We just changed the shapes a little bit, and so, overall that helps make him look a little bit more dog-like. This model is by Badlock, and it's pretty awesome. I really like your approach to the mouth here. I don't think anybody else made it quite that wide, and that's maybe not as realistic or whatever, but at the same time this is supposed to be a stylized version, and making that really wide muzzle just gives him this goofy smile that I just love. So props for that. It was creative, a good interpretation, and he just looks super friendly. A couple of things that stuck out to me originally was he has a little bit of a droopy face, which makes him look almost depressing to look at. Like he looks like he's a little bit depressed or like perpetually sad. So that's one thing that maybe we could try to address. And also the modeled fur, which you've modeled the tufts of fur very literally, and I try to do that as well, but it just seems a little bit odd here. It just seems lumpy. Now, if you were to go through and paint this, I think it would look better if you actually painted in some of these tufts and made that more specific. But just the model as itself, it looks a little bit odd. But again, if you look at this, it really does line up pretty exactly to the concept art. But something about it just seems odd. So maybe you go through and give this a little bit more volume to make it seem a little bit more fluffy. But overall, I mean, this is a really good model. It is pretty heavily, like, there's a lot of polygons here. It's still under the triangle count. Actually, I think my triangle count was 7,000, so this is definitely above that. However, it looks like it was subdivided, but I can't quite tell because if I hit spacebar and go to unsubdivide, it doesn't quite do it evenly. So I'm not quite sure how this was originally made. So maybe this is subdivided, maybe it wasn't. Either way, fantastic job. I would like to see a lower poly version of this just to see what's the most simple shape that you could make with this. But really, my only critique here is around the face, as I would still suggest having that raccoon mask going around the eyes. Now, I know dogs in particular don't have like particularly rounded foreheads or rounded eyes. Let's see, if we look at a picture right here, they do kind of have points. And so, it might be fine if they were going in this direction and you had points like that kind of follow that shape. But that's not quite what's happening here. And so if we have this loop that continues down, it just melts into the face, and he just looks very sad. So I would encourage you to still have that raccoon loop here, and that's going to help the opening and closing of the eyes if it's ever animated. And the facial expressions are definitely really big here, but no matter how you rig this, with this topology, all of the facial expressions are just always going to be sad. Now, to fix this, we can see that the whole front part of the forehead is definitely very sloped, very triangle-ish. So what I'd like to do is just take these areas, pull them out. Let's turn on Topology Mirror. Oh, that's not it. Okay, there we go. If we just pull this out, round it out a bit, I think that's gonna really help. We can pull this in just a touch. Pull these eyes down. But yeah, really defining the corner of the eyes would help quite a bit, and rounding this out certainly will help. But yeah, other than that, just try to keep things a little bit more simple than this. I think this is a little bit overly complicated. Again, maybe it was subdivided, maybe it wasn't. I could probably go back and ask. But for anybody else watching, if you get to this level and you're still modeling, piece by piece, it's really easy for things to get lumpy and messy. So this looks fairly well smoothed, but just be aware that that's definitely a issue that can happen. Last thing I wanted to say about this model is, if you get stuck somewhere and you really need to smooth something out, don't be afraid to jump into sculpt mode, where, if you have a model and, you can't quite get that, facial expression, just try, jumping into sculpt mode, and it looks like that's exactly what the author did here, because you can see we have a mask down there. So let's clear the mask. And, you know, even if it's just regular topology, one thing that might help is to turn on wires and draw all edges. That way you can actually see how, you know, your vertices are being moved as you move them. But, you know, doing things like this can definitely save you a lot of time instead of just trying to, you know, push all of these vertices manually. So that was mostly the tip that I wanted to give on this model. Really, it looks super friendly. The only thing I would fix is the eyes, and you know, it looks like you have the skills to try to tackle the feet, so if you want to give that a go, I think you could do a great job on that. Now, the last model that I want to look at is my own model, because I think that there are a couple things looking at these other submissions that I could take away and learn from them, and I think mostly I'm going to focus on the face here, because I think that's probably the most awkward part of this, and I didn't realize until I saw some of these other submissions how strange and alien these eyes were. And really looking at these dogs' eyes, they're all very, you know, small and round, and puppy eyes can be a bit bigger, so that's fine, but they should definitely not be quite so big. So let's narrow them in a bit. I think that would definitely help. And one thing that I did not do that other people picked up on is the Huskies really have those crazy eyebrows. So I added them in a little bit, but I think, you know, going in and maybe defining those a bit more would be a good choice. So I could take these vertices here, maybe pull those forward a bit. I guess it might be actually a little bit easier in sculpt mode. Let me try that. Sculpting these eyebrows out a bit. And sculpt mode is also good for just smoothing things really quick. Maybe turn the strength down a bit. But yeah, working with these eyes and maybe pulling them in a bit, making them more round, will definitely help make him look a little bit more friendly. And I love the grin on that last one, so maybe I'll take these sides here and pull them out just a bit. This doesn't need to be quite so narrow. And beyond that, if I wanted to animate this, I think I'd need a couple more loops here along the leg to support those deformations. So that's also something that I could definitely improve on. But hopefully this is a good example for you to look at. It's up on Sketchfab that you can see. So in case you get stuck and you're wondering, you know, what to do when you have too many loops on the back, or, you know, you're wondering how to get the loop around, you know, some of these shoulders, you can tell that that's not a great loop, but the major defining one is that one. So it's okay to have, you know, one or two very odd loops going through your model as long as all of the major anatomical features are well defined and clean. Just try to make sure that you're keeping things nice and simple. And the last thing I'll leave you with is just how to start out. We covered this multiple times throughout the course, but, you know, just start out with your basic loops, and I think that'll get you a long way. So even starting out with this, you know, some of the problems that I saw where, you know, maybe the middle point was, you know, too sharp, or the face was too sharp and not round enough, or, you know, there wasn't a loop along the neck. If you start out like this and you kind of refine this shape and then start filling in the gaps later, you're never really going to run into that, and then you can fix all of those problems far beyond or far before they ever become an actual issue. So if you can kind of, you know, visualize what this is going to look like at just this stage, then you can tweak all of these things and, you know, see how they line up, but also make sure you look at them in perspective view and look at these from all the different angles, make sure that it works well, and then start connecting some of the edges. So I hope you find that helpful. There's a lot to cover there, but those are just some of the most common pitfalls. Again, topology is a big one. You know, make sure that you're using your loops to surround major anatomical areas. Any place that's going to deform, you're going to want to place loops around that deformation area. And also just proportions. Make sure that you're constantly referencing how things should move, or, you know, what's the structure underneath some of the fur. One of the users asked for a more detailed sketch, but I did not provide that, mostly because this was not my sketch originally. I think it was either Tim or Jonathan, one of their sketches from a while ago, but also because there's tons of references of dogs on the internet. So if you're ever unsure about an area, you're not sure what to do with the nose and you want more detail, just look up pictures of dogs. That's never a bad thing to just look up pictures of dogs, but in this case, just check out what do the eyes look like, what do the nose looks like, how do the joints connect, look at skeletons, look at shaved dogs, look at whatever you can and try to reference that and use that in your model. So even though it's a very cartoony, stylized dog, you can still take all that inspiration from real world anatomy. Lastly, the other thing I was going to fix here before it was too late was I also connected the leg too low to the body. So let me take these and just kind of move that up a bit. So that was one thing that I kind of pointed out on most of the models, but I also kind of fell into that same trap. So make sure you're leaving a little bit of room there so when it moves around, maybe have extra loop or so, such that it's when you're moving the leg, you're not pulling his chest along with it. So that's it for the exercise notes. I hope you found that helpful and can avoid some of those issues going forward. And if you haven't submitted already, good luck on the exercise.